So let's try and get a rough handle on the shape and thrust of the People's Democratic Party's bid for the presidency through an assessment of some of the critical aspects of its manifesto, what they say they're going to do, and how they intend to do it. Because of course it's one thing to make campaign promises, quite another to go beyond the sound and fury that comes with it to actually fulfill those promises through real action. It's a case of promises meeting political realities, something Mr. Abubakar is surely familiar with, having served as Vice President of Nigeria between 1999 and 2007. And today, Nigeria is going bust with regard to government revenue, external reserves, and the value of the naira. Fiscal deficit has increased and the net revenue from oil has reduced. So in those circumstances, how are Mr. Abubakar and the PDP planning to implement all the spending plans they're promising? Or is it a case of manifestos that will not manifest? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the Professor of International Business, Sylvester Monye, who is a former special advisor to President Goodluck Jonathan on performance monitoring and evaluation, and is currently senior policy advisor to the PDP Presidential Campaign Council. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Tell us how Atiku Abubakar plans to move this country forward with his economic objectives. Let's start with that. How will his growth plans evolve from rhetoric to action in what appears to be a collapsing economy?
Thank you very much. This is a very useful question because we're in a campaign season where people make promises without actually understanding the magnitude of the problem that we are confronted with. What you have in Alhaji Atiku Abubakar is a bundle of experience and capacity and somebody who understands the nature of the problem. What he has said is that he is going to restructure this country. And in restructuring, we are looking at three components. Restructure the economy, restructure the polity and the way the country is governed, and restructure the security. In terms of restructuring the economy itself, you need to understand the magnitude of the problem. Let me give you a typical scenario. Everybody says to us that our problem is productivity, particularly in agriculture. And his understanding is it goes a lot more and beyond that. If you look at the structure of the Nigerian economy as it is, you will know that it is designed to fail. For example, I'll give you the contribution of agriculture to GDP. In Nigeria, it's about 23%. And everybody's saying, why don't you increase or diversify into agriculture? Now, you are already 23%. The global average, the world average, is 4.2%. But we are way at 23.3%. South Africa, their contribution, agricultural contribution to South Africa GDP is 2.8%. UK is 0.6%. China is 6%. India is 13%. So by far the worst is Nigeria at 23%. What it means is that agriculture is contributing to us substantially, and we're quite happy about it. But if you look at the number of people involved in that production of 23%, in South Africa, only 5% of the population is involved in agriculture. In Nigeria, it's about 70% involved in agriculture. In the US, it's about 1%. In the UK, about 1%. So, but everybody's involved in agriculture in Nigeria, and yet the greatest problem we have is food price inflation. Let me explain this inflation business. Now, let's say last year a bag of rice was 20,000 naira. This year is 23% inflation. So it's about 25%. It's gone up 25%. Everything is gone up by 25%. But your salary hasn't gone up. So automatically you are poor. So one of the greatest problems of the economy is food price inflation. And yet everybody's involved in agriculture. So something is fundamentally wrong. So when you understand that only a madman will be doing the same thing over and over, standing at the same point and expecting to make progress, then you need to recalibrate. So what the Atiku administration plans to do is to look at agriculture and say, this is not going to break the poverty circle. We need to do other things. For example, our problem is not production. Our problem is productivity. Sometimes I hear people say you have to have seeds that have high yield. You can't use high yield seed with cutlass and hoe. So we need to go into mechanized and highly commercialized agriculture. If you go to South Africa, and in fact any country in the world, agriculture is a private business and is highly commercialized. So we need to look at the structure of the economy and how much, and you look at it in comparison with what obtains around the world. And Nigeria is way out of it. So we need to break that out of that circle and restructure the structure of the economy itself.
Right, but that's one thing that you've talked about. I'm sure you know that part of the reason, and you kind of touched on it, that Nigeria's economy remains adrift is because there are basic problems about which macro fiscal policies are adopted, policies which have kept Nigeria from realizing its potential. Are you aware of these macro fiscal policies beyond what you just talked about?
Of course. The challenge is that we are not aligning our vision with what we do. Let me just take this issue a little bit further to the issue of production, industrialization, industrial base of the country. You will find that we can't really do much because almost 80% of our industrial input is imported. So we are not looking at the value chain of production. We are not making significant contribution to that production that we're
but everybody is aware of that, including the current government. The reason why these things are hamstrung is because there are allied industries that have to go hand in hand with that industrialization and that value chain expansion. One of them is energy. Let me quote the World Bank to you. Its office in Nigeria says that Nigeria has one of the lowest government revenues to GDP in the world. It's the third lowest in the world. And that has meant that what government is able to spend on basic things like investing in its people, building basic infrastructure, including electricity, things that any country needs to lift people out of poverty and make the country better for everyone, it has not been able to do that. It doesn't matter what the intentions of your candidate is, or of any political leader for that matter. Unless you have the resources and you manage well and you spend well, you're not going to be able to deliver on all those promises that you're making and this brilliant analysis that you're putting forth right now, are you?
Well, you know, we have to decide whether we are going to be a government that runs the economy or we are going to be a government that supports the private sector to run the economy. Government does not generate jobs.
Yeah, but you have to build the infrastructure.
You have to build infrastructure. You need the revenue, you need the tax.
That's what we're talking about.
You need the revenue. Now, the only way you can get the revenue, other than all revenue, is to increase the tax base. How do you increase the tax base? You support the taxpayers. Who are the taxpayers? The private sector. If you don't increase the revenue base, you will go round and round in a circle. And even that revenue is no longer there because of subsidy. You know,
you mean like the petrol subsidy?
Petrol subsidy. You may or may not know that in 2021, the total gross earning of this country was about 7 trillion. Out of the 7 trillion, 5.2 trillion went into subsidy.
Which is a scary.
What was available for spending in terms of the figures you just quoted from the World Bank was just 2.8 trillion out of 7 trillion. This year, it's even worse. In fact, there have been months that everything had gone into subsidy. So there isn't
there's no option, really.
There isn't really option.
Yeah,
because the reality is that we are killing the country softly unless something is done and done quickly.
Yeah, but you know the fear of a lot of people is not so much the fact that they're not aware that perhaps it needs to be removed. The big fear has been their lack of trust in the government whenever it comes to do with anything to do with money. It doesn't matter which government, whether it's PDP or APC. So if you removed PMS subsidy, what would you put that money towards in a country that needs everything from primary health care, basic education, rural roads, energy access that we're just talking about? I mean, this country has the highest number of out-of-school children, you know, the highest number of people without energy access. What would an Atiku government prioritize if that money becomes available? How would those funds, and this is absolutely key because a lot of people don't trust the PDP because of its association with corruption. How would those funds be credibly, transparently, accountably put towards that things that would benefit the Nigerian people? Well, that's what people want to hear.
First of all, let me disabuse your mind about this issue of association with corruption.
Well, that's a fact. People associate the PDP.
Well, it's a perceptional issue.
Yeah, it is. And perception is everything.
Well, let me say that the golden years of this country, between 1999 to date, were those years that were PDP years.
I would certainly agree with that assessment.
So the issue of removing subsidy has been on the cards, and it was the government of our PDP government that initiated it because of the realization that you need the resources. And in any case, the subsidy, the so-called subsidy, is not targeted subsidy. In other words, it's not going to where it should go. So if you understand that it's not going to where it should go, then you've just listed what do you do with the revenue that we generate. You listed them. I couldn't have done a better job than what you've just done. That is where the money should go. Education, health, infrastructure, power. These are situations that are in critical situations. So the resources, in terms of where they go to, are not in doubt.
Yeah, but the PDP had 16 years in power. It couldn't fix electricity, could it? I mean, so it's a bit fresh of you to come and tell us and criticize a government that's been there for 8 years, although that's more than enough, because anybody who understands energy will tell you that 3 years is what it can take you to put everything you need to fix your electricity. Okay. But you guys had 16 years and you couldn't fix it.
Well, you see, if you knew where the country was coming from before PDP came into office, you will understand.
Yeah, but you had 7 years of fixing that. That is trying to, and you managed. I mean, one thing the Obasanjo government and the Atiku government enjoyed was international confidence. That's why the economy started growing at a very, very large rate. Once you've got international confidence, you know, people bring their money in, they invest.
Now, you recall that under the Obasanjo administration, there was a systematic privatization of public assets, particularly the power generating assets. They were done in phases and in stages, and there was significant improvement in the generation. What needed to be done is sequential and gradual additional power output. Now, when the current APC government was coming in, they said they understood the problems. They said kick PDP out so that they can fix the problem. Now, coming to say 8 years down the road that they couldn't fix it, it's really...
Yeah, but the point you're making, I'm afraid you're not going to get away with that, because I know that the Obasanjo government, with Lieli Moke as the person in charge of power, started working on power from about 2004, 2005. They couldn't finish everything. Another PDP government came in 2007. Another PDP government came in 2009, 2010, all the way to 2015. So there is, I mean, I'm trying to understand why you didn't fix power.
Well, I mean, there were very concerted efforts. The power situation was complex, difficult, a new terrain.
So you couldn't figure it out in 16 years?
No.
And now you want us to give you a chance to go in there with a promise that you're going to fix it?
No, that is not correct.
Well, that's what you're saying, basically.
No, the power situation was being fixed. It was privatized. What we needed to do was to support the private sector, which we did, to take off from where the public sector left off. It was the power, I mean the private sector, that was generating and distributing. Where the problem was is the issue of transmission, the transmission grid, which government had kept to itself because it was considered...
so you couldn't fix it in 16 years, and now you're criticizing someone who's had 8 years. I'm just trying to understand the logic.
Government is a continuum.
Of course it is a continuum.
It is a continuum.
But you had 16 years, and your argument is that we should give you a chance to get back into power, and you're criticizing the government that's been there for 8 years. You're not saying it's a continuum. You're saying they're not doing well enough, therefore you should go in and fix it. But you had 16 years and you couldn't.
Well, you see, the plan that we have is what you look at. They have had a plan. They haven't done better. They haven't done better.
Look, all people want is to switch on their light and it stays
Absolutely.
on. It doesn't matter whether anyone's done better or worse.
Absolutely.
You know, as far as they're concerned, the APC and the PDP, what's the difference?
Well, the difference is that we have two sets of governments, and you are able to compare and say which one has done better. Is it the PDP or is it the APC?
Anyway, let's move away from that and let's turn to a very important point that you raised earlier, which is the issue of restructuring.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about economic restructuring. Perhaps we should look to political restructuring. Many Nigerians would agree that the country needs to be restructured and that things simply can't continue the way they are. So if it's not going to be business as usual, what is Atiku's business unusual plan for restructuring this country?
Well, first of all, it is understood that you couldn't really control and manage the country from the center. It is understood that you need to allow people to have the latitude to do what they want to do at their own level. It is understood that you don't hog the resources at the center and determine what happens at the subnational level. It is understood that you don't have to sit in Abuja and determine how a road is fixed in Asaba or in Benin. So what the Atiku administration is planning when it comes in is to give everybody the opportunity to decide their own fate, how they want to go, and the speed with which they want to go, with the commensurate resources passed on to them. So you don't give responsibility without the necessary authority. So the idea is that give them the responsibility, give them the resources, and provide a standard for the monitoring of the performance at the subnational level. You allow people to determine their fate, as it were, without necessarily directing everything from the center. That is the central plank in the restructuring agenda.
Well, I think a lot of people would agree with that, and certainly, I mean, the point really is the political will to implement it, because obviously for that kind of fundamental change to occur, you've got to have the National Assembly on board, you've got to have the state assemblies on board, and that kind of thing. So it's to see that. So I mean, there's no point belaboring the point, because until
I can even say
assuming he gets in, that's when we'll know if he's going to do it.
Well, the point is that he is spoken about it from when it was unpopular. Now it's become a cliche. Everybody's talking about restructuring. Most people can talk about restructuring without necessarily meaning it. There are some manifestos that I've looked at without a word mentioned in the manifesto about restructuring.
To be honest and to be fair to your candidate, I think he did an absolutely marvelous job in defining what restructuring is and how he's going to tackle it. I mean, he wrote a little book about it, which I still have upstairs. I mean, I thought it was an absolutely excellent work.
Because he believed
But it's a theoretical work.
Well, a theory is something that you believe in.
Yeah, that's where practice comes from.
And he is not saying it because it's fashionable to say it. He didn't say it because he was running for an election. He was saying it because he believed in it. He was conveying his thoughts on it, how he thinks this thing should be done. So he is not a new convert to the subject of restructuring. He's saying it because he believes in it and he means it. Well, and he's going to do it if he gets the opportunity. That's one.
Yeah.
The other point is that he has sufficient capacity and commitment to be able to reach the necessary stakeholders to convince them about the need for the restructuring to be done, and that no segment of the country is going to be disadvantaged by restructuring. So he has the eloquence, he has the capacity, he has the knowledge, and he has the reach to be able to implement it. He is not saying it because it's fashionable to say so. So it's important for people to know.
And that's a central plank of what he aims to do if he gets in.
Yep.
Meanwhile, of course, a brutal campaign of violence continues across this country. Insecurity continuing to bite. What is his plan for that?
Well, first of all, the third component of the restructuring is the issue of security. You know, it is almost unimaginable that we don't have state police. It is inconceivable that the police force in a state is controlled from the center. It is inconceivable that a commissioner of police from Imo State will go to Abia State, I mean not Abia, maybe or your state or somewhere or Jigawa. How do you operate in an environment you are not even familiar with? What he is saying in the restructuring of the issue of security is let states have control of their resources. If somebody entered my community, the people in my community will know that some strange fellow is in, and they will monitor, and they will be accountable to the leadership of the state. So there is really no better way to begin to address the issue of insecurity than to localize it. There is just no way. Let me give you a typical example. For years, people we have sent troops to police the pipeline against vandalism. The moment a local person was given the contract to police the pipeline in the Niger Delta area, you've seen the outcome. It is called local knowledge. And that is what policing should be. There's just no way you will not have state police or even local government police and you say you are fighting insecurity.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, someone described the manifestos that political parties put out as things that will not manifest, which is a great play of words, I think. And the reason is because they say, unlike in the past, Nigeria is in a critical, perhaps even terminal situation today. So the failure of any of these promises and points of reform that you make could trigger a deep, great depression that would lead to complete meltdown in this country. So this is a different time. That's why people are holding you to what you say. They don't want to see any promises and all this talk about, oh, we're going to do this and do that, and then you get in. Because this country could just fall apart, literally.
Well, the difference between the PDP manifesto and the other manifestos is that if you pick it, you will not just see an analysis of the problem, you will see how it will be done, the drivers of that implementation. It is there. It tells you how funding will be done. It is in the manifesto. Don't forget that manifesto is not a plan of action. Manifesto is only a vision document that says to you, when we have the opportunity to rule this country, this is what we intend to do.
And this is how we
intend to do it. This is our thinking. Yeah. Now, when you get elected, then you develop a medium-term plan that sets out in great detail the implementation milestones as well as the key critical deliverables. So those are the things that you need to understand. But what is critical is that we have a candidate who is sufficiently experienced to know that I need to be here. The country needs to be there. We are in a dire strait. And therefore, for us to take ourselves out of the insecurity situation, we need to localize policing. Now, in terms of how do you... because
very briefly, because we're almost out of time.
People tend to express the fear. How do you have police in control in different states? What happens in other parts of the world? You have central training institution that provides standardized training for all the police forces, so that ultimately the policing in all the states will be uniform.
Sylvester Monye, I want to thank you very much indeed. And you are, of course, a professor of international business, former special advisor to President Goodluck Jonathan, and currently senior policy advisor to the PDP Presidential Campaign Council. Thank you very much.